Hey, tonight we're diving into a fascinating journey through one of history's darkest yet most transformative periods. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the gentle creaking of ship's timber beneath your hammock, the familiar sound that has lulled you to sleep and roused you to consciousness for more months than you care to count, and as your eyes adjust to the dim amber light filtering through the porthole, you become aware of the hushed voices of your fellow crew members gathered around the galley table in the pre-dawn darkness, their weathered faces illuminated by the flickering glow of a single oil lamp that casts dancing shadows across the cramped quarters of the merchant vessel that has become your floating home, and though you cannot yet make out their words, the tone of their conversation carries that particular mixture of excitement and unease that always accompanies the sharing of tales from the deep. Those stories that sailors have passed down through generations like precious cargo, each retelling adding new layers of embellishment and terror to accounts of encounters with creatures so fantastic that landlubbers dismiss them as mere superstition, yet you know from your own experiences in the vast expanses of ocean that stretch beyond every horizon that the sea holds mysteries far stranger than any tale spun in a tavern. And as you swing your legs over the side of your hammock and feel your bare feet touch the cold wooden planks that have been worn smooth by countless sailors before you, you cannot help but recall the conversation you overheard just 3 nights ago when Captain Murdoch's crew came aboard to trade supplies and share news from their recent voyage to the Caribbean. Their eyes still wide with the memory of something they claimed to have witnessed in the waters off Jamaica, something that defied every natural law they thought they understood about the creatures that inhabit the ocean's depths. The sailor who told the tale was a grizzled veteran named Harrison, whose scarred hands and salt-stained clothing spoke of decades spent battling wind and wave, and as he accepted the rum that your captain offered him, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he began to describe an encounter that had left his entire crew shaken to their very cores, speaking of a morning when they had been becalmed in waters so still they resembled a vast mirror reflecting the cloudless sky above the sea, so transparent that they could see clear to the bottom some 30 fathoms below, where strange formations of coral created an underwater landscape unlike anything they had encountered in all their years of sailing. And it was there, in that cathedral-like silence broken only by the gentle lapping of wavelets against their hull, that they first became aware of something moving in the depths beneath them, something vast and serpentine that seemed to undulate through the water with a grace that spoke of intelligence rather than mere animal instinct, its scales catching and reflecting the sunlight in patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon directly, creating an almost hypnotic display of shifting colors that ranged from deep emerald green to brilliant sapphire blue, with undertones of silver that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Harrison paused in his telling to drain his cup of rum before continuing, his weathered face growing pale despite his deep tan as he described how the creature had slowly risen from the depths, its massive coils becoming more visible with each passing moment until they could make out details that filled them with a mixture of wonder and terror. Speaking of scales the size of dinner plates that overlapped in patterns so perfect they seemed designed by some divine hand, and eyes the size of carriage wheels that regarded them with an intelligence so profound that several of his crew members had fallen to their knees in prayer, convinced they were looking upon one of the great leviathans mentioned in the oldest sailing songs. Those ancient beings that were said to have ruled the ocean since the world was young, long before men had ever thought to venture beyond sight of land in wooden vessels that seemed laughably fragile when measured against the power contained within those magnificent coils that continued to spiral upward through the crystal-clear water until they could see that the creature extended far below the limits of their vision, its true size remaining a mystery that their minds could barely begin to comprehend. The silence that followed Harrison's words was broken only by the creaking of ship's timbers and the distant cry of seabirds, and you remember how even your own captain, a man not given to flights of fancy or superstitious thinking, had leaned forward with obvious fascination as he pressed for more details about this encounter, asking questions about the creature's behavior and appearance with the intensity of a scholar studying some rare manuscript, and Harrison had obliged by describing how the great serpent had circled their vessel for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, its movements creating currents in the still water that rocked their ship gently from side to side, and how its breath, when it occasionally surfaced to take air, had created clouds of mist that smelled of deep ocean trenches and something else that he could only describe as the scent of time itself, as if this being carried within it the accumulated essence of centuries spent in the ocean's darkest depths where sunlight had never penetrated and where the pressure would crush any normal creature to powder in an instant. As you make your way across the deck toward where your shipmates continue their hushed conversation, you cannot help but think of your own encounters with the unexplained phenomena that populate the sailor's world of myth and legend, those moments when the rational mind struggles to process what the eyes have clearly witnessed. And you remember the night 3 months ago when you were standing watch during the middle passage between Nassau and Charleston, the sea around you dark as ink beneath a new moon that offered no illumination beyond the faint stars that seemed impossibly distant in the vast dome of sky overhead, when you began to notice a strange phosphorescent glow emanating from the water far below. At first just a dim pulse of light that you attributed to the natural luminescence that sometimes accompanies certain types of sea life, but which gradually grew brighter and more defined until you could make out distinct shapes moving through the glowing water, forms that seemed too large and too purposeful to be any known species of fish or marine animal. And as you watched in fascination tinged with growing unease, you began to realize that these creatures, whatever they were following your ship, matching its speed and course with a precision that suggested not random chance but deliberate intent, their bioluminescent displays creating patterns in the water that almost seemed like some form of communication. As if they were trying to send a message to the humans who sailed above them in their wooden vessel, blissfully unaware of the intelligence that observed their passage through waters that these beings had claimed as their own domain long before the first human had ever set foot aboard a ship. The memory of that night still sends a shiver down your spine as you recall how the glowing forms had maintained their escort for nearly an hour before gradually fading back into the depths, leaving you to wonder whether you had witnessed some previously unknown species of deep-sea life or something far more extraordinary. And you remember how difficult it had been to convince yourself that you had actually seen what your eyes insisted was real, the rational part of your mind searching for explanations that would allow you to categorize the experience within the bounds of known natural phenomena, yet knowing deep in your heart that what you had witnessed fell far outside the catalogue of creatures that learned men claim to inhabit the world's oceans. And as you approached your captain the next morning to report what you had seen, you found yourself struggling to find words that would convey the profound sense of otherness that had emanated from those luminous beings, the feeling that you had been granted a glimpse into a realm of existence that operated according to rules and principles completely foreign to human understanding, an underwater civilization perhaps, or being so ancient that they remembered the ocean when it was young and empty of human influence, when ships were nothing more than the fevered dreams of land-dwelling creatures who had not yet learned to venture beyond the safety of shallow coastal waters. Now, as you join the circle of sailors gathered around the lamp, you recognize the same mixture of excitement and apprehension in their faces that you have seen countless times before when men of the sea share their encounters with the inexplicable, and you settle onto a wooden crate as Thomas Whitmore, the ship's navigator and a man whose reputation for truthfulness is beyond question, begins to tell of his own experience with creatures that defy easy classification, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone who has told this story many times but still struggles to believe it himself, speaking of a voyage he took 7 years ago aboard a Spanish treasure galleon that had been captured by the notorious pirate Captain William Kidd. And how during their flight from pursuing naval vessels through the treacherous waters of the Sargasso Sea they had found themselves trapped for days in a vast field of floating seaweed that stretched to every horizon, the golden brown algae so thick that their ship could barely make headway despite favorable winds. And it was there, in that twilight world where the boundaries between sea and land seemed to blur, that they encountered beings that challenged every assumption they held about the nature of life in the ocean's depths. Whitmore pauses to accept a measure of rum from the bottle that circulates among the gathered sailors, and you notice how his hands tremble slightly as he lifts the cup to his lips, a tremor that speaks of memories that still have the power to disturb his peace even after so many years. And when he continues his tale, his voice drops to barely above a whisper as he describes how the first sign of something unusual came in the form of singing that seemed to emanate from the seaweed itself, voices so beautiful and haunting that the entire crew was drawn to the ship's rail to listen, their normal duties forgotten as they strained to catch every note of melodies that seemed to speak directly to something deep within their souls, promising rest and comfort and an end to all the hardships and dangers that defined their lives at sea. And how several of the younger crew members had actually begun to climb over the rail, their eyes glazed with an expression of rapturous longing, before Kidd himself had broken the spell by firing his pistol into the air and shouting orders that snapped them back to awareness of their peril. For the captain had recognized the signs of siren song from tales told by his own mentor, stories of ships found drifting empty through these same waters, their crews vanished without a trace, leaving behind only personal belongings and half-eaten meals that suggested their occupants had simply walked away from their lives as if called by some irresistible summons. The battle that followed, according to Whitmore's account, was unlike anything recorded in the annals of naval warfare, for their enemies were creatures of such otherworldly beauty that even as they attacked with claws and teeth that could rend human flesh like paper, many of the pirates found themselves hesitating to defend themselves, mesmerized by forms that seemed to shift and change before their eyes, sometimes appearing as women of impossible loveliness with flowing hair that moved as if underwater even in the open air, and at other times revealing their true nature as predators whose scaled skin glistened with an oily iridescence and whose eyes held the cold intelligence of apex hunters that had learned to use beauty as a weapon more deadly than any blade. And it was only through the leadership of Captain Kidd, who kept his men focused on the fight by constantly reminding them of the fate that awaited those who succumbed to the creature's enchantments, that they managed to break free from the Sargasso and escape into open water, though not before losing 3 good men to the depths, their bodies pulled down by beings that sang even as they dragged their victims beneath the waves, their voices creating harmonies so complex and beautiful that those who heard them never quite recovered from the experience, spending the rest of their lives searching for music that could match the perfection of those final songs. As Whitmore's tale draws to a close, you become aware that dawn is beginning to break over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflect off the gentle swell surrounding your ship, and the normal sounds of a vessel coming to life begin to intrude upon the hushed atmosphere that has enveloped your group throughout the night, storytelling, the calls of sailors preparing for the day's work mixing with the cries of seabirds that follow in your wake, hoping for scraps from the galley. Yet the spell woven by the tales you have heard remains unbroken, leaving each member of your circle lost in thoughts of the mysteries that lurk beneath the waves. Those encounters with the impossible that define the sailor's relationship with the sea and transform every voyage into a journey through landscapes of wonder and terror that exist far beyond the reach of landlubbers' imagination. And as you rise from your makeshift seat and begin to attend to your own duties, you carry with you a renewed sense of the ocean's vast potential for surprise, knowing that each day spent upon its surface brings the possibility of witnessing phenomena that will challenge everything you think you know about the world and your place within it. The morning's work passes quickly as your ship makes good time across seas that remain mercifully calm, yet you find your attention constantly drawn to the water around you, searching for signs of the unusual or unexplained, and you remember the story that old Samuel Hartley told you during your first voyage, when you were still green enough to be sick over the rail whenever the swells grew higher than a man's head, about his encounter with what he insisted was a sea serpent of such immense proportions that its body formed islands when it surfaced to bask in the tropical sun, creating temporary landmasses complete with beaches where seabirds would nest and palm trees would somehow take root in the creature's barnacle-encrusted hide, growing and flourishing for months at a time before their host would submerge again, carrying these miniature ecosystems down into the depths where they would presumably die and decay, only to be replaced by new growth when the great beast surfaced again in some distant part of the ocean, following cycles that operated on time scales measured in years or decades rather than the brief moments that defined human experience. And how Hartley claimed to have actually walked upon the back of this living island, gathering fresh fruit and drinking from streams that flowed across its surface, never realizing until the ground began to move beneath his feet that he was standing upon something alive. Something so vast that its breathing created weather patterns and its movements generated currents that could carry a ship hundreds of miles off course if a navigator was not careful to account for forces that no map or chart could accurately predict. The idea of creatures so large that they could be mistaken for geological features speaks to something fundamental about the ocean's capacity to humble human understanding, reminding you of the countless stories you have heard over the years about islands that appear and disappear according to their own mysterious schedule, about seamounts that sailors swear were not marked on their charts when they passed through the same waters just months before, and about the persistent reports of navigators who claim to have discovered new lands only to find empty ocean when they returned with proper survey equipment, leading to theories about creatures whose very existence challenges the assumption that the Earth's geography remains fixed and unchanging over time scales relevant to human observation. And as you work your way through the morning's tasks of checking rigging and adjusting sails, you find yourself wondering whether the ocean floor itself might be home to beings of such vast proportions that their movements could reshape entire underwater mountain ranges, creating new depths and shallows that would confound mapmakers and navigators for generations to come. Entities so ancient and so large that they exist almost outside the realm of biological classification, more akin to geological forces than to any creature that zoologists might catalogue and study. Your contemplation of these possibilities is interrupted by a shout from the crow's nest where young Billy Morrison has been keeping watch since before dawn, his voice carrying a note of excitement mixed with uncertainty as he calls down to report something unusual visible off the starboard bow. And as you join the other crew members who rush to the rail to see what has caught the lookout's attention, you find yourself squinting against the morning sun to make out what appears to be a disturbance. In the water perhaps 2 miles distant, a churning and frothing of the sea surface that creates a patch of white foam easily visible against the deep blue of the surrounding ocean. And though such phenomena can have perfectly mundane explanations ranging from underwater currents to schools of feeding fish, there is something about the pattern and persistence of this disturbance that sets it apart from any natural occurrence you have witnessed in your years at sea, something that speaks to the presence of intelligence and purpose rather than mere random chaos. And as your ship alters course to investigate this anomaly, you cannot shake the feeling that you are about to witness something that will provide material for your own contributions to the endless cycle of stories that sailors tell to make sense of their encounters with the incomprehensible. The distance between your vessel and the disturbance closes slowly, each passing minute revealing new details that only deepen the mystery of what you are approaching. For what had initially appeared to be a simple patch of churning water gradually resolves into something far more complex and disturbing, a series of concentric circles of foam and spray that seem to pulse with their own rhythm, expanding and contracting in patterns that suggest not random turbulence but coordinated movement, as if multiple large objects were rising and falling beneath the surface in perfect synchronization, creating a display that reminds you of nothing so much as a vast underwater dance performed by beings whose size and nature remain hidden beneath the waves. And as you draw closer still, you begin to make out darker shapes moving within the foam, glimpses of what might be massive tentacles or serpentine coils that break the surface just long enough to be seen before disappearing again into the depths, their brief appearances creating splashes that send spray high into the air where it catches the morning sunlight and creates momentary rainbows that arc across the scene like colorful benedictions over whatever ritual or gathering is taking place beneath your ship's approaching keel. Captain Morrison calls for the crew to ready the longboat, his decision to investigate at closer range speaking to the same curiosity that drives all experienced sailors when confronted with phenomena that fall outside their accumulated knowledge of the sea's moods and inhabitants. Yet you can hear the tension in his voice as he issues orders for weapons to be loaded and secured, precautions that acknowledge the possibility that whatever they are about to encounter might not welcome human observers. And as you help to lower the boat into the water and take your place among the 6 crew members selected for this expedition into the unknown, you feel your heart beating faster with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension that has become familiar over years of sailing into waters where maps end and legend begins, those regions of the ocean where the normal rules of nature seem suspended and where encounters with the impossible become almost routine, transforming every voyage into a journey through realms that exist at the very edges of human understanding and belief. The longboat cuts through the calm water with surprising speed, its oars manned by sailors whose years of experience have given them the strength and coordination to maintain a steady rhythm even as their attention remains focused on the spectacle that grows larger and more detailed with each stroke. And now you can hear sounds emanating from the disturbance ahead, a complex symphony of splashing and what might be vocalizations of some kind, low-frequency rumbles and higher-pitched calls that seem to form patterns suggesting communication between multiple individuals. And though the sounds are unlike anything produced by whales or dolphins or any other marine life you have encountered, there is something undeniably organic about them. Something that speaks to the presence of living creatures engaged in activities that serve purposes you can only guess at, perhaps feeding or mating or participating in social rituals that operate according to behavioral patterns developed over evolutionary timescales that dwarf human history. And as you draw close enough to make out individual shapes moving within the churning water, you realize that you are witnessing something that will challenge every assumption you have ever held about the nature and diversity of life in the ocean's depths. The creatures that reveal themselves as your boat approaches the edge of the disturbance are unlike anything described in the natural histories that learned men have compiled based on specimens washed up on beaches or glimpsed briefly from ships' decks, for these beings seem to combine features from multiple taxonomic categories in ways that suggest either evolutionary paths that diverged from known patterns millions of years ago or the existence of entirely separate origins for life in the deep ocean, their bodies displaying characteristics that blend the serpentine grace of sea snakes with the intelligence suggested by the large eyes that regard your approach with obvious awareness and calculation. and their movements through the water demonstrate a coordination and purposefulness that speaks to social organization far more complex than anything attributed to even the most intelligent marine mammals, as if you are observing not merely animals following instinctive patterns but conscious beings engaged in activities that serve cultural or spiritual purposes that operate according to logic systems completely foreign to human understanding, and the realization that you may be looking upon the members of an underwater civilization sends a chill down your spine that has nothing to do with the cool morning air that carries the salt spray from their activities across the water toward your small boat. One of the larger specimens, its body easily 40 feet in length and as thick around as a ship's mast, separates itself from the group and approaches your longboat with movements that display none of the aggressive posturing you might expect from a territorial predator, but rather suggest curiosity mixed with what might be diplomatic caution, and as it draws close enough for you to make out the details of its appearance, you find yourself looking into eyes that hold an intelligence so profound and ancient that you feel like a child in the presence of a scholar whose learning encompasses knowledge accumulated over centuries of study. And when the creature speaks, for there is no other word to describe the complex series of sounds that emerge from what you assume must be some form of vocal apparatus, the tones carry harmonics and overtones that seem designed to convey meaning rather than mere emotional states, and though you cannot understand the specific content of this communication, you have the unmistakable impression that you are being addressed directly, that this being has recognized you as a conscious entity capable of understanding and has chosen to attempt some form of first contact between species separated by evolutionary paths that diverged in the distant past when the world was young and the boundaries between different forms of life were far more fluid than they have since become. The moment stretches endlessly as you float motionless in your longboat, held in the gaze of this ancient intelligence, while your mind struggles to process the implications of what you are experiencing. For if these creatures possess language and social organization and the capacity for curiosity about other forms of life, then the ocean contains civilizations that have developed completely independently of human culture, societies that may have been observing and evaluating human maritime activities for centuries while remaining hidden in depths that human technology cannot yet penetrate. And the stories that sailors have told for generations about encounters with sea serpents and other mysterious beings suddenly take on new significance as possible accounts of contact between human explorers and representatives of these underwater nations, diplomatic meetings that were misunderstood by both sides due to the vast differences in biology and culture that separate terrestrial and aquatic forms of conscious life, and you begin to wonder whether the aggressive encounters described in some tales might have resulted from human fear and misunderstanding rather than any inherent hostility on the part of these beings. Whether the attacks attributed to sea monsters might actually have been defensive responses by creatures who viewed the intrusion of human vessels into their territory as potential threats to communities and cultures that existed long before the first human ever set foot aboard a ship. The communication continues for several more minutes, with the large creature making a series of increasingly complex vocalizations while others of its kind maintain their distance but observe the proceedings with obvious interest, and you notice that some of the sounds being produced seem designed to test your acoustic capabilities, starting with simple tones and gradually building to elaborate melodic structures that might represent attempts to establish some form of mutual understanding. And though you lack the physiological equipment necessary to respond in kind, you find yourself nodding and making what you hope are reassuring gestures, trying to convey through body language that you mean no harm and are honored by this opportunity for peaceful contact. And when Captain Morrison softly orders the crew to begin backing water to put distance between your boat and the creatures, you feel a profound sense of loss at the ending of this historic encounter, knowing that you have been privileged to witness something that may never be repeated. A moment of genuine communication between species that evolved in completely different environments but share the capacity for consciousness and curiosity about the universe they inhabit together. As your longboat retreats toward the ship, you continue to watch the creatures until they gradually submerge and disappear beneath the surface, leaving behind only slightly disturbed water and the memory of an experience that will haunt your dreams for years to come. And you realize that you now carry within yourself knowledge that will forever change your relationship with the ocean, for you can never again look upon its vast expanse without wondering what intelligences move through its depths. What civilizations flourish in the eternal darkness of the deep trenches? What forms of art and science and philosophy have developed among beings who have never known the touch of sunlight or the constraint of solid ground? And as you help to hoist the longboat back aboard your ship and listen to your fellow crew members share their own impressions of what they have witnessed, you understand that you have become part of the ancient tradition of sailors who serve as bridges between the known and unknown worlds, carriers of stories that challenge landlubbers to expand their conception of what is possible in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than most humans are prepared to believe. The days that follow your encounter pass in a blur of routine shipboard activities, yet you find that every aspect of life at sea has taken on new significance now that you know the ocean harbors intelligences that may be observing your passage, evaluating your behavior, and drawing their own conclusions about the nature and intentions of the strange surface-dwelling creatures who cross their domain in floating wooden structures, and you begin to pay attention to details that you had previously ignored, noting the patterns of bird flight that might serve as signals to underwater observers, watching for unusual wave formations that could indicate the presence of large bodies moving beneath your ship, and listening for sounds that might carry meaning beyond the ordinary noises of wind and water. And though you see nothing more of the serpentine beings you encountered, you develop a growing conviction that they are never far away, that your ship moves through an ocean that teems with conscious life whose activities and purposes remain hidden from human perception by the simple fact that your species has never developed the sensory capabilities or conceptual frameworks necessary to recognize intelligence when it manifests in forms radically different from your own terrestrial patterns of consciousness and communication. Your thoughts return frequently to the stories you heard during that pre-dawn gathering just a few nights ago, tales that now seem less like sailors' fantasies and more like fragmentary reports from a vast and ongoing cultural exchange between human mariners and the various species of intelligent life that inhabit the ocean's depths, and you begin to understand that the tradition of storytelling that defines maritime culture serves purposes far more important than mere entertainment or the preservation of cautionary wisdom, for these tales function as a primitive form of ethnographic record documenting centuries of contact between human explorers and the diverse civilizations that flourish beneath the waves. And though the accounts become distorted through repeated telling and filtered through human cultural assumptions that often interpret alien behavior as supernatural or threatening, they preserve essential information about the existence and nature of forms of life that formal science has yet to acknowledge or study, creating an informal database of knowledge that exists entirely outside the official channels through which human learning is normally organized and transmitted. This realization leads you to listen with new attention when your shipmates share their own stories during the long evening watches, and you begin to notice patterns and consistencies that suggest these tales are based on genuine observations rather than pure imagination, common themes that appear across accounts from different sailors in different times and places, describing creatures whose behavior and appearance remain remarkably consistent despite the geographical and temporal separation of the witnesses, and you start to develop your own theories about the various species of intelligent marine life that these stories describe, categorizing them according to their apparent capabilities and behavioral patterns, and trying to construct a coherent picture of the underwater world that exists parallel to human civilization, a realm of cities and cultures that has developed according to its own historical trajectory while remaining largely invisible to the land-based societies that humans have created around the margins of the ocean that covers most of their planet's surface. The merchant captain whose ship you currently serve approaches you one afternoon as you work to repair a section of rigging damaged by the previous night's storm, and after observing your work for several minutes in the thoughtful silence that characterizes men who have spent decades learning to read the subtle signs that indicate a sailor's experience and reliability, he begins to share his own collection of encounters with the unexplained phenomena that populate the world beyond the edges of conventional navigation, speaking in the measured tones of someone who has given considerable thought to questions that most people dismiss without serious consideration. And his first tale concerns an incident that occurred during his early years as a navigator aboard a Dutch trading vessel that had been blown far off course by storms while attempting to round Cape Horn, finding themselves in waters so remote that their charts contained only blank spaces where landmarks and depth soundings should have provided guidance for safe passage through unknown seas. According to the captain's account, they had been sailing for 3 days through fog so thick that visibility extended barely beyond their bowsprit when they began to hear sounds that seemed to emanate from all around them, a rhythmic pounding that reminded them of nothing so much as the sound of massive hammers striking metal, as if somewhere in the mist that surrounded their vessel, invisible workers were engaged in some form of construction project that required tools and techniques far beyond anything known to human shipbuilders, and though they strained their eyes to penetrate the grey veil that concealed the source of these sounds, they could see nothing but the endless wall of fog that had trapped them for days in a world reduced to the few square yards of deck space that remained visible beneath their feet, while the hammering continued with a regularity that spoke of purpose and organization rather than random natural phenomena, and several crew members swore that they could hear voices calling out in what might have been work songs, though the words, if words they were, belonged to no language any of them recognized. Despite the crew's collective familiarity with the dialects spoken in ports throughout the Caribbean and along the coasts of South America, The mystery deepened when the fog finally began to lift on the fourth day, revealing not the empty ocean they expected but a scene that challenged every assumption they held about the nature of the sea and its inhabitants, for spread out around their vessel in every direction were what appeared to be floating structures of impossible size and complexity, vast constructions that seemed to be built from materials that gleamed like metal but moved with the flexibility of living tissue, and upon these platforms they could see figures that were clearly engaged in some form of organized activity, beings that possessed the general body plan of humans but displayed proportions and capabilities that set them apart from any terrestrial species. Their movements through both air and water suggesting adaptations to an environment where the boundaries between these elements were less absolute than human physiology required, and as the captain and his crew watched in amazement, they realized that they had stumbled upon what could only be described as a floating city, a massive construction project that was apparently designed to create permanent settlements capable of existing entirely upon and within the ocean's surface, independent of any connection to land-based resources or technologies. The beings who inhabited this aquatic metropolis seemed as surprised by the appearance of the human vessel as the sailors were by their discovery of this hidden civilization, and for several hours the two groups observed each other across the water that separated their respective forms of transportation, each side apparently trying to determine whether the other represented a threat or an opportunity for peaceful contact, and the captain described how several of the aquatic beings eventually approached their ship in vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built, organic craft that moved through the water with the fluid grace of living creatures but displayed the purposeful design characteristics of sophisticated engineering. And when these ambassadors came close enough for detailed observation, it became clear that they possessed intelligence and technology that had developed along completely different lines from human science, utilizing biological processes and materials in ways that achieved results equivalent to human mechanical engineering while remaining fully integrated with the natural systems of the ocean environment rather than imposing artificial structures upon the landscape in the manner that characterized human civilization. The communication that followed was necessarily limited by the vast differences in physiology and sensory capabilities that separated the two species, yet both sides seemed determined to establish some form of mutual understanding, and the captain recalled how the aquatic beings had demonstrated various aspects of their technology by manipulating their organic vessels in ways that revealed sophisticated understanding of hydrodynamics and marine biology, while the human crew had attempted to reciprocate by showing their own tools and techniques for navigation and seamanship, creating an impromptu cultural exchange that lasted for several hours before the aquatic beings began to withdraw their floating city from the area, apparently following migration patterns or seasonal schedules that required them to move on to other regions of the ocean. And as the massive structures disappeared over the horizon, the captain and his crew were left with the knowledge that they had been privileged to witness one of the great hidden civilizations of the Earth. A society that had achieved technological sophistication equivalent to or perhaps exceeding human capabilities while remaining completely invisible to land-based observation and scientific study. This account, delivered in the captain's matter-of-fact tone that suggested he was simply reporting navigational hazards rather than describing encounters with the impossible, adds another layer to your growing understanding of the ocean as a realm populated by forms of intelligence that have developed in complete independence from human culture, and you begin to envision a complex ecosystem of conscious beings that includes not only the serpentine entities you encountered yourself but also the builders and engineers described in the captain's tale, suggesting that the underwater world contains multiple species of intelligent life that may interact with each other in ways that parallel the diplomatic and commercial relationships that connect different human societies, creating networks of trade and communication that span the ocean's depths and operate according to protocols and customs that have evolved over time scales that dwarf the brief history of human maritime exploration. And the realization that these civilizations have existed and flourished while remaining almost entirely hidden from human awareness humbles your understanding of your own species' place in the larger community of conscious life that inhabits the planet you have always assumed belong primarily to terrestrial creatures like yourselves. As evening approaches and the ship's routine shifts toward the quieter rhythms of night watches, you find yourself seeking out other crew members who might have their own stories to contribute to your expanding catalogue of encounters with marine intelligence, and you are not disappointed when James Clearwater, the ship's carpenter and a man whose steady demeanor and practical skills have earned him the respect of sailors throughout the Caribbean, agrees to share an experience that occurred during his service aboard a privateering vessel that had been commissioned to harass Spanish shipping in the waters around Cuba and Puerto Rico. A tale that begins with what seemed like a routine raid on a treasure galleon but quickly developed into something far more extraordinary when their intended victim turned out to be carrying cargo that defied every category of goods normally associated with maritime commerce. Crates and containers filled with specimens and artifacts that suggested contact between Spanish colonial authorities and forms of life that existed far outside the known taxonomies of natural science evidence of trade. Relationships that extended beyond the realm of human commerce into territories and societies that operated according to principles completely foreign to European understanding of economics and natural philosophy. Clearwater's description of the treasure galleon's cargo reads like an inventory of impossibilities, speaking of preserved specimens that displayed characteristics from multiple species combined in ways that suggested either unknown evolutionary processes or deliberate genetic manipulation by intelligences capable of directing biological development according to artistic or functional criteria that transcended the random mutations and environmental pressures that human naturalists assumed governed all life on Earth, and among these biological curiosities were artifacts that seemed designed for use by beings whose sensory capabilities and physical proportions differed dramatically from human norms. Tools and instruments whose purposes remained mysterious but whose sophisticated construction indicated manufacturing techniques that achieved precision and durability through methods that bore no resemblance to European metalworking or craftsmanship, creating objects that functioned as intended despite being composed of materials that human science could not identify or reproduce using known chemical and physical processes. The most disturbing aspect of Clearwater's discovery was the evidence it provided of ongoing relationships between Spanish colonial officials and the sources of these extraordinary materials, documents written in Spanish but containing maps and trading schedules that referenced locations and seasonal patterns that corresponded to no known geography, suggesting that certain members of the colonial administration had established regular contact with non-human societies and were engaged in commercial exchanges that operated completely outside the official channels through which Spain managed its New World empire, creating a shadow economy that dealt in goods and services whose very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence and civilization. And the implications of this discovery were so profound that Clearwater and his fellow privateers had ultimately decided to sink the galleon rather than attempt to bring its cargo into any human port, recognizing that the knowledge it contained could destabilize not only Spanish colonial authority but the entire European understanding of their place in a world that apparently contained civilizations far older and more sophisticated than anything achieved by human culture. The decision to destroy such extraordinary evidence speaks to the psychological pressure that these encounters place upon human observers, for the discovery of non-human intelligence forces a fundamental reassessment of humanity's role in the universe that many minds find too disturbing to accept, and you begin to understand why so many of these tales are dismissed as fantasy or superstition by those who have never experienced direct contact with the phenomena they describe, for the alternative is to acknowledge that human civilization represents only one small thread in a vast tapestry of conscious life that encompasses forms of intelligence so alien that their very existence challenges the basic categories through which people organize their understanding of reality. And the comfortable assumption that humans occupy a privileged position as the dominant intelligent species on Earth becomes untenable when confronted with evidence of societies that achieved technological and cultural sophistication while human ancestors were still struggling to master the basic techniques of agriculture and metalworking, leaving those who encounter such evidence with the choice between accepting a radically expanded conception of the world or retreating into denial that preserves their existing beliefs at the cost of ignoring phenomena that could revolutionize human knowledge if properly studied and understood. The night deepens around your ship as more sailors join the informal gathering that has formed around the mainmast, each drawn by the same fascination with mysteries that defines the maritime temperament, and the stories continue to flow as freely as the rum that passes from hand to hand, each tale adding new dimensions to the emerging picture of an ocean that serves as home to civilizations whose complexity and antiquity dwarf human achievements, and you listen with growing amazement as Robert Thorne, a gunner whose scars bear witness to his participation in some of the fiercest naval battles of recent years, describes his encounter with what he can only characterize as an underwater city of such vast scale that his ship spent 3 full days sailing along its perimeter without reaching either end of the massive construction, its towers and domes rising from the ocean floor to within a few fathoms of the surface, their architecture displaying an aesthetic sensibility that combined organic curves with geometric precision in ways that suggested design principles based on mathematical relationships that human engineers had yet to discover, and throughout this submarine metropolis he observed signs of active habitation in the form of lights that moved in purposeful patterns and structures that seemed to be undergoing constant modification and expansion. As if the city itself were a living entity capable of growth and adaptation rather than a static construction built according to predetermined specifications. Thorne's description of the city's inhabitants focuses on their remarkable diversity, suggesting that this underwater civilization encompassed multiple species living in apparent harmony, their physical characteristics ranging from the serpentine forms you have encountered yourself to humanoid beings whose adaptations to aquatic life included gills and webbed extremities but who retained enough resemblance to terrestrial humans to suggest possible common ancestry in the distant past. And among these various peoples he observed evidence of sophisticated social organization in the form of coordinated activities that required planning and communication across large groups, construction projects that demanded specialized knowledge and technical skills, and what appeared to be ceremonial gatherings that brought together representatives from different districts of the city to participate in rituals whose significance remained mysterious but whose complexity indicated cultural traditions that had been refined over generations of practice and development, creating a society that seemed to combine the technological achievements of advanced civilization with spiritual and artistic sensibilities that had been preserved despite their obvious mastery of sciences that human scholars were only beginning to explore. The most remarkable aspect of Thorne's account concerns his observation of what he interpreted as educational institutions, vast complexes where young members of various species gathered to receive instruction from elder teachers, their lessons apparently covering subjects that ranged from practical skills like the manipulation of the organic technologies that powered their civilization to more abstract disciplines that involved the study of patterns and relationships that seemed to encompass everything from the movements of celestial bodies to the intricate social dynamics that governed interactions between different species within their multiracial society. And the sophisticated pedagogical methods he observed suggested that these underwater peoples had developed approaches to learning and knowledge transmission that were far more effective than the crude educational systems employed in human societies, creating generations of individuals who possessed both technical competence and cultural sophistication that enabled them to contribute meaningfully to a civilization that had achieved stability and prosperity while maintaining harmony with the natural systems that supported their existence. As Thorne's tale draws to a close, you find yourself reflecting on the implications of his observations for your understanding of intelligence and civilization. For if these underwater societies have achieved such remarkable levels of development while remaining hidden from human awareness, it suggests that the criteria by which humans judge the success and sophistication of cultural systems may be fundamentally flawed, based on assumptions about progress and achievement that reflect terrestrial limitations rather than universal principles of conscious development. And the possibility that these aquatic civilizations have discovered approaches to science and technology that achieve better results than human methods while avoiding the environmental destruction and social conflict that seem to accompany human progress forces a reconsideration of whether humanity's path toward greater knowledge and capability represents the optimal trajectory for intelligent beings or merely one possible route among many alternatives that might prove more sustainable and beneficial in the long term. The arrival of the ship's cook with a pot of hot soup provides a welcome break in the storytelling, giving everyone time to satisfy their hunger while contemplating the extraordinary accounts they have heard. And as you accept your portion of the simple but nourishing meal that represents one of the few comforts available during long voyages, you notice how the familiar routine of sharing food creates a sense of community and belonging that transcends the divisions of rank and background that normally structure shipboard life, and you realize that these gathering sessions serve important social functions beyond mere entertainment, creating opportunities for crew members to process and integrate experiences that might otherwise remain isolated and disturbing, transforming potentially traumatic encounters with the unknown into shared cultural knowledge that strengthens the bonds between individuals who must depend upon each other for survival in an environment that offers no mercy to those who cannot work together effectively under pressure. The soup finished and the bowls cleaned and stowed, the stories resume with renewed energy as William Hackett, the ship's boatswain and a man whose authority stems from decades of experience in every aspect of seamanship, begins to describe an encounter that occurred during his youth when he served as an apprentice aboard a whaling vessel that had been following pod migrations through the Arctic waters north of Greenland, pursuing their quarry into regions so remote that ice formations and weather patterns followed rules that seemed to operate independently of the seasonal cycles that governed more temperate latitudes, and it was in these frigid waters where the boundary between sea and ice shifted constantly according to forces that no human navigator could predict or control. that they encountered evidence of intelligence that challenged every assumption about life's ability to adapt to extreme environments, discovering beneath the frozen surface a realm of activity and organization that suggested the presence of civilizations that had not merely survived but flourished in conditions that would quickly kill any unprepared human explorer. According to Hackett's account, the first indication that they had entered waters inhabited by unknown forms of intelligent life came when their ship became trapped in an ice field that formed around them with unnatural speed and precision, creating a prison of frozen water that seemed designed to immobilize their vessel while allowing whatever inhabitants of this frozen realm to approach and investigate these unexpected visitors from warmer seas. And as the crew prepared for what they assumed would be a long siege while waiting for changing weather conditions to break up the ice that held them captive, they began to notice signs of movement beneath the frozen surface. Shadows and disturbances that suggested the presence of large objects or creatures moving through the water that remained liquid beneath the ice sheet, following patterns that indicated purpose and coordination rather than the random wandering of marine animals seeking food or shelter in the harsh conditions that prevailed in these northern waters. The breakthrough came on the third day of their captivity when sections of the ice surrounding their vessel began to crack and shift in ways that created channels leading away from their ship toward what appeared to be open water in the distance. And though such changes in ice formation could theoretically result from natural processes like temperature variations or tidal forces, the precision and timing of these developments suggested deliberate engineering by intelligences capable of manipulating their frozen environment with the same skill that human engineers applied to the construction of harbors and waterways, creating passages that allowed navigation through what had previously seemed like an impenetrable barrier. And when Captain Jenkins ordered the crew to take advantage of this apparent reprieve by following the newly opened channels toward what might be escape from their icy prison, they found themselves being guided through a maze of ice formations that revealed increasingly clear evidence of artificial modification and design. The structures they encountered as they navigated through this frozen landscape defied every expectation about what was possible in an environment where temperatures remained well below the freezing point of water for most of the year. For embedded within the ice walls that formed the channels through which their ship passed were constructions that seemed to serve both practical and aesthetic purposes, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that caught and reflected the available light in ways that created an almost cathedral-like atmosphere of beauty and majesty. While their functional aspects included what appeared to be observation posts and communication stations that allowed the inhabitants of this frozen realm to monitor and coordinate the movements of visitors through their territory, ensuring that no unauthorized intrusion could occur without detection and appropriate response from whatever authorities governed this remarkable civilization that had learned to thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The inhabitants themselves, when they finally revealed their presence, displayed adaptations to their Arctic environment that went far beyond anything achieved by known Arctic species, their physiology apparently modified through either evolutionary processes or technological intervention to allow them to function efficiently in conditions that would quickly incapacitate human explorers, and their intelligence and technological capabilities became apparent through their construction of vehicles and tools that utilized the unique properties of ice and cold water to achieve results that rivaled or exceeded the performance of human equipment designed for similar purposes, creating transportation systems and manufacturing processes that operated according to principles that human science had never explored because of the assumption that extreme cold represented a barrier to sophisticated technological development rather than an opportunity for alternative approaches to engineering and design. The cultural achievements of these Arctic peoples proved equally impressive, as evidenced by the artistic works that decorated their ice constructions and the ceremonial gatherings that Hackett observed during his brief visit to their frozen cities, events that combined music and visual displays with ritual activities that seemed designed to celebrate the unique qualities of their environment while maintaining spiritual connections to forces and principles that transcended immediate material concerns, creating a religious and philosophical framework that had apparently enabled them to find meaning and purpose in a landscape that most humans would consider utterly hostile to civilized existence. And their obvious success in creating a sustainable and prosperous society under such challenging conditions raised profound questions about human assumptions regarding the environmental requirements for advanced civilization and the possibility that intelligence might find ways to flourish in any environment where basic physical survival remained possible. Hackett's description of his departure from this Arctic civilization carries undertones of sadness and regret, for he recognized that he had been privileged to witness achievements that represented thousands of years of cultural development by beings whose approach to the challenges of existence had produced solutions that were both elegant and effective, and the knowledge that such remarkable civilizations existed in regions of the planet that humans dismissed as uninhabitable expanded his understanding of life's potential for adaptation and innovation, while simultaneously humbling his assumptions about humanity's role as the dominant intelligent species on Earth, and as his whaling vessel followed the channels that led them back to open water and eventually to more familiar seas. He carried with him memories that would forever change his relationship with the ocean and its hidden inhabitants, transforming him from a simple sailor into a witness to wonders that challenged every boundary between the possible and impossible. The Arctic tale concludes just as the ship's bell announces the beginning of the middle watch, yet none of the gathered sailors show any inclination to seek their hammocks, for the stories they have shared have created an atmosphere of heightened awareness that makes sleep seem like an unwelcome intrusion into a night devoted to exploring the mysteries that define their chosen profession. And as you settle more comfortably against the wooden crate that serves as your seat, you prepare to listen to more accounts of encounters with the extraordinary beings that populate the ocean's hidden realms, knowing that each tale adds another piece to a puzzle whose complete solution may forever remain beyond human comprehension, but whose individual components provide glimpses of a universe far stranger and more wonderful than most people dare to imagine. The next story comes from Marcus Delacroix, a former French naval officer whose service in the Caribbean during the recent conflicts between European powers had exposed him to phenomena that fell far outside the scope of conventional military intelligence, and his account begins with what seemed like a routine patrol mission in the waters between Martinique and Barbados, a region that should have been thoroughly familiar to experienced navigators but which revealed new mysteries when approached. With the heightened attention that comes from military necessity and the constant awareness that enemy vessels might appear at any moment to transform peaceful sailing into deadly combat. And it was this state of alert observation that allowed Delacroix and his crew to notice details and patterns that civilian mariners might have overlooked or dismissed as unimportant, creating opportunities for discoveries that would have been impossible under the relaxed conditions that characterize merchant voyages through well-traveled shipping lanes. According to Delacroix's account, the first sign that they had entered waters inhabited by unknown forms of intelligent life came in the form of lights that appeared beneath their vessel during the hours before dawn, illumination that seemed to emanate from structures or beings moving in the depths below their keel, following their ship's course with a precision that indicated deliberate tracking rather than coincidental parallel movement. And though such phenomena could theoretically be explained by bioluminescent marine life or underwater volcanic activity, the patterns and intensities of these lights suggested artificial sources that operated according to purposes and schedules that bore no resemblance to any natural process that Delacroix had encountered during his years of naval service. And when he ordered his crew to conduct depth soundings to determine what might be causing these mysterious illuminations, the results indicated that the sea floor in this area was far deeper than their charts suggested, with bottom readings that exceeded the range of their sounding equipment and implied the existence of underwater canyons or abyssal plains that had never been mapped or explored by human navigators. The mystery deepened when lookouts in the rigging reported seeing what appeared to be artificial lights on the horizon, not the steady glow of another ship's lanterns but pulsing displays that created complex patterns in multiple colors, as if some form of signaling system was being used to coordinate activities across vast distances. And when Delacroix ordered a course change to investigate these phenomena, his ship began to encounter evidence of extensive underwater construction in the form of structures that broke the surface just enough to be visible to careful observers, their geometric shapes and obvious artificial origin indicating the presence of a civilization that had achieved the engineering capability necessary to build permanent installations in the open ocean, far from any land-based resources or support systems that human societies would consider essential for major construction projects. And the scale and sophistication of these works suggested technological capabilities that equaled or exceeded anything achieved by European naval architects and marine engineers. The inhabitants of this underwater realm revealed themselves gradually, beginning with scouts or sentries who approached Delacroix's vessel in craft that seemed to move through the water without any visible means of propulsion, their smooth progress through both surface waves and underwater currents suggesting mastery of hydrodynamic principles that human shipbuilders had yet to discover. And when these advance parties apparently determined that the French warship posed no immediate threat, they were followed by larger delegations that included individuals whose apparent authority and elaborate decorative modifications marked them as leaders or diplomats empowered to engage in formal contact with representatives of surface-dwelling civilizations. And though the communication that followed was necessarily limited by the vast differences in physiology and sensory capabilities that separated the two species, both sides seemed committed to establishing some form of mutual understanding that might serve as the foundation for future peaceful interactions. The technological demonstrations that these underwater peoples provided during their diplomatic exchanges revealed scientific achievements that challenged every assumption about the limitations imposed by aquatic environment on advanced engineering and manufacturing, for they displayed devices and materials that utilized the unique properties of seawater and marine organisms to achieve results that human technology could only approximate through much more complex and energy-intensive processes, creating tools and instruments that seem to grow rather than being assembled from separate components, their organic integration and adaptive capabilities suggesting that these peoples had discovered methods for directing biological development according to functional specifications, essentially domesticating life itself to serve their technological needs while maintaining the flexibility and self-repair capabilities that characterized living systems. And their obvious success in applying these biotechnological approaches to everything from transportation to communication to environmental modification indicated that they had developed an entirely different paradigm for scientific and technical progress that avoided many of the destructive consequences that seemed to accompany human technological advancement. Delacroix's account of his brief diplomatic mission to their underwater capital provides descriptions of architectural achievements that rival the greatest works of human civilization while surpassing them in their integration with natural systems and their adaptation to the unique requirements of underwater existence. Speaking of vast domed structures that seem to be cultivated rather than built, their walls composed of living coral and other marine organisms that had been guided through accelerated growth patterns to create spaces suitable for habitation and social activities while maintaining their biological functions and contributing to the overall health and stability of the marine ecosystem that supported this remarkable civilization. And throughout these living buildings he observed evidence of sophisticated social organization in the form of specialized districts devoted to different aspects of cultural and economic life, educational institutions where knowledge was transmitted through methods that seemed to combine direct neural interface with traditional instruction, and research facilities where the fundamental principles governing life and consciousness were studied through techniques that human science was only beginning to develop. The departure from this underwater civilization proved as memorable as the initial contact, for the diplomatic protocols that governed such interactions apparently required elaborate ceremonies that served both practical and spiritual purposes, ensuring that visitors carried away accurate understanding of the society they had encountered while receiving blessings and protections that would safeguard their journey through waters controlled by other underwater peoples who might view unauthorized intrusion as hostile activity requiring defensive response. And Delacroix described how the farewell celebrations included demonstrations of artistic and musical achievements that revealed aesthetic sensibilities of extraordinary sophistication. Performances that combined visual displays with acoustic effects that seemed designed to communicate emotional and philosophical concepts that transcended the boundaries of specific languages or cultural traditions, creating universal experiences of beauty and meaning that spoke directly to whatever neural structures enable conscious beings to appreciate harmony, proportion, and the creative transformation of raw experience into artistic expression. The memory of these encounters continued to influence Delacroix's subsequent career and worldview, transforming him from a conventional military officer focused on tactical and strategic concerns into something approaching a philosopher whose understanding of warfare and diplomacy had been expanded to encompass the possibility that human conflicts represented only a small fraction of the complex political relationships that connected the various intelligent species that shared the planet and his. Reports to French naval authorities, though officially classified and never made public, apparently contributed to policy changes that emphasized exploration and scientific investigation over purely military objectives, reflecting a growing recognition within certain circles of the European establishment that the world contained forms of intelligence and civilization that could serve as allies or enemies depending upon how initial contacts were managed, and that the future security and prosperity of human societies might depend more upon their ability to establish peaceful relationships with non-human civilizations than upon their success in traditional military competitions with other European powers. As Delacroix's tale concludes and the assembled sailors absorb the implications of his diplomatic encounters with underwater civilizations, you find yourself wondering about the broader political and economic consequences of widespread contact between human societies and the various forms of intelligent life that apparently flourish throughout the ocean's depths. For if these underwater peoples possess technological capabilities that surpass human achievements while maintaining sustainable relationships with their environment, they might serve as sources of knowledge and techniques that could revolutionize human science and industry. Yet the same capabilities that make them valuable potential allies could also make them formidable enemies if cultural misunderstandings or conflicting interests led to hostilities between surface and submarine civilizations. And the realization that humanity's future might depend upon diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity rather than military superiority forces a fundamental reconsideration of the qualities and capabilities that human societies should cultivate in order to thrive in a world that contains multiple forms of advanced intelligence. The stories continue as dawn approaches, each account adding new dimensions to your understanding of the ocean as a realm populated by civilizations whose complexity and achievements challenge every assumption about the nature of intelligence and the possibilities for conscious life to adapt and flourish in environments that human experience would suggest are hostile to sophisticated cultural development. And you begin to perceive patterns in these tales that suggest the existence of communication networks and trade relationships that connect underwater societies across vast distances, creating economic and cultural systems that operate independently of human awareness while occasionally intersecting with human activities in ways that produce the encounters that sailors describe in their stories, and the possibility that these underwater civilizations have been observing and evaluating human maritime activities for centuries while remaining largely hidden from surface detection raises profound questions about what they might have concluded regarding human nature and intentions. Based on their observations of warfare, slavery, environmental destruction, and the other activities that characterize human behavior when unaware of intelligent observers. Thomas Hartwell, the ship's quartermaster and a man whose methodical approach to inventory management reflects a mind that naturally seeks patterns and connections in apparently disparate phenomena, shares an account that focuses on the economic implications of contact with underwater civilizations, describing his discovery of trade goods aboard captured pirate vessels that could only have originated from non-human sources, artifacts and materials that displayed manufacturing techniques and utilized substances that fell completely outside the known catalog of earthly resources. And his careful analysis of these mysterious items revealed evidence of sophisticated economic relationships that operated according to principles that differed dramatically from human commercial practices while achieving results that suggested far more efficient allocation of resources and far more equitable distribution of wealth than characterized any human economic system. And the implications of these discoveries forced him to reconsider fundamental assumptions about scarcity value and the competitive dynamics that human economists assumed were necessary features of any advanced commercial civilization. Hartwell's description of the mysterious trade goods focuses particularly on materials that seemed to possess properties that defied human understanding of chemistry and physics, substances that could change their characteristics in response to environmental conditions or user intentions, maintaining structural integrity under stresses that would destroy conventional materials while adapting their form and function to serve purposes that extended far beyond their original design parameters, and these adaptive materials were incorporated into tools and devices that operated according to principles that human science had yet to discover, creating technologies that achieved remarkable results through elegant solutions that required minimal energy input while producing no waste products or environmental damage, suggesting that these underwater civilizations had solved many of the fundamental problems that plagued human industrial development while maintaining aesthetic standards that transformed purely functional objects into works of art that enhanced rather than degraded their surroundings. The economic relationships implied by these trade goods suggested commercial networks that spanned oceanic distances while operating according to principles that emphasized mutual benefit and sustainable resource use rather than the competitive exploitation that characterized human commerce. And Hartwell's analysis of the distribution patterns and quality variations in these materials indicated that the underwater civilizations had developed methods for coordinating production and distribution across multiple societies without creating the inequality and conflict that seemed to accompany human economic development, achieving prosperity for all participants while maintaining the environmental health that served as the foundation for long-term stability and continued growth. And the possibility that human societies could learn from these alternative approaches to economic organization offered hope for solving many of the social and environmental problems that resulted from current commercial practices while opening opportunities for mutually beneficial trade relationships that could accelerate human technological and cultural development. The most intriguing aspect of Hartwell's discoveries concerned evidence of ongoing monitoring and evaluation of human economic activities by underwater observers who seemed to be studying surface civilizations with the same systematic attention that human scholars devoted to the analysis of foreign cultures and commercial systems, and the sophistication of this research suggested that underwater civilizations possessed detailed knowledge of human social and economic organization while maintaining their own independence from surface-based commercial networks, creating opportunities for them to offer assistance and guidance to human societies while avoiding the dependency relationships that might compromise their own autonomy and security. And the possibility that such assistance might already be occurring through carefully managed channels that remained invisible to human authorities raised questions about whether some of the technological and cultural advances that human societies attributed to their own ingenuity might actually represent gifts or guidance from non-human sources that preferred to remain anonymous while contributing to human development in ways that avoided the social disruption that might result from open acknowledgement of non-human intelligence. As Hartwell's economic analysis draws to a close, the assembled sailors find themselves contemplating the possibility that their own careers as maritime traders and explorers might be contributing to a much larger pattern of cultural and economic exchange that encompasses not only human societies but also the various underwater civilizations that have remained hidden from official recognition while maintaining their own complex relationships with surface activities, and the realization that every voyage might involve encounters with intelligent observers who remain invisible while evaluating human behavior and intentions adds new significance to the ethical dimensions of maritime life, suggesting that individual choices and actions might have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate practical effects to influence the long-term relationships between species that share the planet but have developed along completely different evolutionary and cultural trajectories. The approach of sunrise brings a natural conclusion to the night storytelling, yet the gathered sailors seem reluctant to break up their informal congress and return to the routine duties that structure shipboard life, for the tales they have shared have created a sense of expanded awareness that makes ordinary activities seem insufficient to contain the revelations they have experienced. And as you join your shipmates in watching the eastern sky gradually brighten with the promise of another day, you carry with you a transformed understanding of your profession and your place in a universe that contains wonders and intelligences far beyond anything suggested by conventional human knowledge. And you know that this night's conversations will continue to influence your perceptions and decisions for years to come, serving as a constant reminder that the ocean beneath your ship's keel harbors mysteries that challenge every assumption about the nature of life and consciousness while offering possibilities for discovery and understanding that could transform human civilization if approached with the respect and humility that such encounters demand. The stories you have heard throughout this long night of revelation have woven themselves into a tapestry of understanding that encompasses not only the immediate practical concerns of maritime life but also the broader philosophical and spiritual implications of existence in a universe populated by multiple forms of conscious intelligence, each pursuing its own path toward knowledge and fulfillment while occasionally intersecting with other species in ways that create opportunities for mutual learning and growth. And as you begin the new day's work of maintaining your ship's equipment and preparing for whatever challenges the ocean might present, you do so with the awareness that every league sailed and every horizon crossed brings the possibility of encounters that could expand human understanding while contributing to the ancient and ongoing conversation between conscious beings who share the privilege of awareness in a cosmos that seems designed to reward curiosity, courage, and the willingness to embrace mystery as an invitation to growth rather than a barrier to understanding. The sun rises fully above the horizon as your ship continues its passage through waters that now seem charged with infinite possibility, their surface concealing depths that harbor civilizations whose achievements and wisdom offer both inspiration and humility to those fortunate enough to glimpse their existence. And as the morning light transforms the ocean from mysterious darkness into sparkling transparency, you carry within your heart the knowledge that beneath these familiar waves lie realms of wonder that will continue to call to human explorers long after your own voyage has ended. Ensuring that the tradition of maritime storytelling will preserve and transmit these encounters across generations of sailors who will add their own discoveries to the ever-growing catalogue of evidence that consciousness and intelligence flourish in forms and environments that exceed the boundaries of human imagination, while demonstrating that the universe itself may be far more alive and aware than the most optimistic human philosophers have dared to propose. leaving you with the profound recognition that your brief time upon these waters connects you to mysteries that extend backward to the origins of life itself and forward to possibilities that remain hidden in the vast expanses of time and space that await future exploration by beings whose understanding may eventually encompass truths that currently lie beyond the reach of any single species or civilization, no matter how advanced their science or how deep their wisdom. Creating an eternal dialogue between consciousness and cosmos that gives meaning and purpose to every moment of existence while promising that the greatest discoveries and most profound revelations still lie ahead for those brave enough to venture beyond the safety of familiar shores into the infinite ocean of mystery that surrounds all conscious life like a boundless invitation to wonder, growth, and ever deeper understanding of the magnificent complexity that underlies the apparent simplicity of daily existence, transforming every sunrise into a celebration of possibility and every voyage into a pilgrimage toward truths that remain forever just beyond the horizon. Calling sailors and philosophers alike to continue their patient exploration of a reality that reveals new wonders with each passing day while maintaining enough mystery to ensure that the journey of discovery will never end, leaving future generations of human explorers with the same sense of excitement and anticipation that now fills your heart as you prepare to meet whatever challenges and opportunities this new day might bring. Knowing that each encounter with the unknown adds another thread to the great tapestry of understanding that connects all conscious beings in their shared quest for meaning and truth in a universe that seems infinitely generous in its willingness to reward those who approach its mysteries with open hearts and minds prepared to be transformed by the wonders that await discovery in the depths of ocean and consciousness alike.